Namaskaromi, and welcome everyone to the second episode in our journey through the traditions of yoga. Now, this week we're going to be beginning our historical journey to find out the roots of modern yoga. Our question for today is kind of simple. Where does modern yoga come from? You can think of those yoga classes that you can take at a studio or a gym or an ashram, spiritual retreat, at a school, a spa, wherever it might be. Maybe you've wondered as you're taking one of those classes, how old is this stuff? When was it created? Where was it created? By whom? And why was it created? These are the questions that we're going to be kind of digging into in this week's session. I've given you a couple of readings that discuss actually what modern yoga is by Elizabeth de Michelis and Andrea Jane. If we read them together, I think we'll get a pretty good idea of answers for all these questions that I've just posed to you. In the weekly video, what I want to try to do is to extract a kind of basic story of how modern yoga came to be, based on those two sources, and also some more articles that I've included by Suzanne Newcomb, Mark Singleton, and others. In case you're digging deeper, I've given those to you in the module, and feel free to read them. Now, where did modern yoga come from? Well, for starters, we can say it definitely came from India. Maybe we should say South Asia. The word yoga itself is a Sanskrit word, and it comes from the verbal root yuj, which means to harness or join or control. Yoke, as in yoking a bull to a cart. In fact, the verb yuj is cognate with the English word yoke. Both come from a same original Indo-European root. Anyway, the current Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi of India, says that yoga is India's greatest gift to the world. In 2015, in fact, his government got the United Nations to declare yoga to be a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage of humanity. They also declared June 21st as the International Day of Yoga. So every year on June 21st, Indian embassies and consulates around the world, including here in Vancouver, spend a lot of time and energy every year trying to get people, encouraging people all over the world to do the same 21-stepped asana sequence all at the same time. In other words, the fact that yoga came from India is a pretty big deal to modern Indian citizens, especially to Indian Hindus. It's also a big deal to the current government, who uses yoga as a kind of international soft power, in a way, to compete culturally with other countries for global prestige. That's probably a different topic to talk about. Anyway, we can all agree yoga came from India. Now, when did it come from India? And when was it created? By whom? How? Why was it created? The answers to these questions are a little bit more difficult to find. And as it turns out, it kind of depends if you want a faith-based answer or an evidence-based answer. Let me read for you the official origin of yoga that the government of India has declared and published, and you can decide if it's evidence-based or if it's faith-based. I'll leave it to you to decide. This is how they want to tell the story, the history of yoga, which is found in a pamphlet published for International Yoga Day in 2019. The science of yoga has its origins thousands of years ago, long before the first religion or belief systems were born. The seers and sages carried this powerful yogic science to different parts of the world, including Asia, the Middle East, Northern Africa, and South America. Interestingly, modern scholars have noted and marveled at the close parallels found between ancient cultures across the globe. However, it was in India that the yogic system found its fullest expression. Agastya, the Saptarshi, who traveled across the Indian subcontinent, crafted this culture around a core yogic way of life. Kind of goes on from there, you get the picture. According to the Indian government, then, a group of ancient Indian sages somehow traveled all over the world, even to South America in prehistoric times. They spread this powerful yogic science to all of these places in the primordial ages, like way before the dawn of any other civilization, any other religion. So if we do see parallels to yoga in any other culture, it's all because these primordial Rishi Munis had gone there first. Meanwhile, in India, yoga's homeland, yoga just blossomed and reached its fullest expression over the course of 5,000 years or more. Now, I'll leave it to you to decide if you want to believe the government's official account of the origins of yoga. Feel free, but you should ask yourself: is this story evidence-based or is it faith-based? Right? What it does reveal, I think, is that for Indians, again, especially Hindus, it's a kind of issue of pride to say that yoga is really old and that there's an unbroken continuity between modern yoga and its ancient roots. Now, scholars, on the other hand, tell us a rather different story, and this is one that's based on concrete textual and historical evidence. And so let's try to dig into that story in the rest of the videos. Most scholars agree actually that yes, actually yoga did come from India, and yoga as an idea is really old. It's just not 5,000 years old, maybe more like 2,500 years old. It's still pretty old. But there's one problem. And the problem is that pre-modern yoga isn't exactly the same as the modern yoga that you find in the studio. We'll be learning about pre-modern yoga starting in week 5, but DeMichelis tells us, and Andrea Jane tells us, Singleton, Newcomb, and a number of other modern scholars tell us the tradition of modern yoga was actually only born in India around 150 years ago in the late 1800s as part of a colonial encounter between the British and India. This was when Indian proponents of yoga repackaged older ideas and practices of yoga into something that could fit in a modern urban middle-class lifestyle as a form of physical fitness as well as spiritual well-being. These modern yoga traditions then got exported to Europe, North America, all corners of the globe, transforming, evolving, kind of bumping into each other and creating what you can think of as transnational global yoga culture. The story of how that happened has basically 3 parts to it, 3 different acts to the drama, maybe. First, there's the birth of modern yoga. This takes place sometime in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Then there's a bifurcation, as Andrea Jane calls it, between 2 different types of modern yoga, starting around the 1920s or so. One pathway emphasizes meditative, philosophical, ethical, moral dimensions of yoga practice. The other emphasizes the physical techniques of posture, breath control, being stretchy, and so on. The birth of modern yoga happens during British colonial rule in India. So let's just take a moment, in case you don't know, to review what happened kind of during that time of colonialism. In the 1700s, if you went to India, you would have seen actually many different small kingdoms dotting the subcontinent, and then a few larger imperial states, including the Mughal Empire, which was kind of the biggest. The British initially set up shop in India as a trading company, the East India Company, in 3 market towns in the subcontinent: Bombay, Madras, Calcutta, Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata. They gradually grew in power until by the year 1857, after a failed Indian Revolution, the crown took over and India became fully part of the British Empire. As far as religion and culture were concerned, 2 different things happened during this colonial period. For one, Western travelers, scholars, spiritual seekers began to study India, engage with Indian religion, philosophy, spiritual life. This included the strange medieval practices they found of itinerant yogis, sadhus, and fakirs that the British found roaming the Indian countryside. These weren't your modern yogis, but they were remnants of a pre-modern past. They were doing yoga to either A, liberate themselves from death and reincarnation, or B, to gain magic powers. The more conservative elements of the British colonialists, also Christian missionaries, actually also Indian progressives in India, urban elites, they judged these communities kind of harshly. They saw these yogis as being extreme, barbaric, antisocial. Andrea Jane puts it, they found these yogis to be mysterious, bizarre, uncivilized, and threatening to modernity and rationality. In contrast, this kind of yoga was also embraced for its exotic and erotic value by occultists, mystics, other kind of countercultural figures in Europe and in the US in the late 1800s. These are examples like Pierre Bernard, Arthur Avalon, Aleister Crowley. Jane also tells us about the American woman named Ida C. Craddock, who was interested in tantric magic and the erotic dimensions of hatha yoga, which she thought that she could be used to spice up kind of sex life in a marriage. She was brought actually on obscenity charges in the U.S. for her writings, thrown in prison, and sadly, she ended up committing suicide as a result. So that was what yoga was like in that early colonial period. There were remnants of a pre-modern set of tantric and hatha yoga practices, which were largely received negatively by British colonialists and progressive Indian citizens, but then were embraced also by fans of the occult and other kind of alternative religious pathways in the 1800s. We'll take a break right here, and then we'll come back and look at how modern yoga developed in the next time period, in the late 1800s.